So when you think about, okay, now I have this Chat GPT, I have a paper due, I know that Chat GPT can knock this out in 30 seconds. Why should I put all the work in? Well, as a Christian, our heart is not to dishonor Christ. We want to honor him in all that we do and strive for excellence in that.
Welcome to the Art of Discernment, where faculty and staff of the Masters University help us apply Scripture to life's most pressing questions. You can learn more about the university at masters.edu. Now, onto the show.
Welcome to the Art of Discernment. My name is Dr. Mitch Hopewell, and I'm your host for this episode of the Art of Discernment. Today, with me, I have Professor Joe Suzuki here at the Masters University and Dr. Tai-Danae Bradley, also visiting professor here at the university. Our topic for today is artificial intelligence. And this is a far-reaching, it's wider than we could probably cover in a podcast session. But we have a couple of topics that we think would be helpful. And the subject of this podcast is the art of discernment. And we want to help our viewers and our listeners to sharpen their discernment. And we obviously want them to do that from a biblical standpoint. So let's jump in. Tai-Danae, why don't you tell us just a little bit about your experience and what you do, and then answer for us the question, what is artificial intelligence? Simply speaking, if that's possible. And why is the word intelligence included with something like artificial?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, you asked about my background a little bit. So, as you mentioned, I'm a visiting professor of mathematics here, a research professor. The visiting part of that hints at the fact that I also have a full-time job at a technology company, which actually has the word artificial intelligence in its name. Part of that is because when I was in graduate school, I had the opportunity to do research in mathematics that was motivated by some ideas in AI, artificial intelligence, and in particular when it comes to language, which is something maybe we'll get to later. So that's a little bit about my background. And you asked for just, what is intelligence or artificial intelligence simply put?
Yeah.
I'm going to try. I think
Okay.
it can be made simple. It might be too simple, which you can tell me that too.
Okay.
But I think from, broadly speaking, intelligence just refers to this idea of the ability to do a task or solve a problem, really simply put. And the artificial part of that, the adjective, means something that's solving a problem or doing a task that's not a human brain, that's not like made out of carbon atoms or something. And so historically that refers to computers that are doing things. But I think just basically we have a task that needs to be done, and let's see if something that's not a human can do that task.
Joe, maybe we'll move over to some of your area of expertise. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your background as a professor here in the Department of English, and then help us understand from your perspective, how does someone from your discipline area approach something like artificial intelligence?
It's going to take a long time. I've been teaching at the Masters since 1998. And that my field is extremely broad, including literature, critical theory, philosophy, languages, including linguistic theories. So this a whole topic of artificial intelligence has been so near and dear to my heart. But I've encountered this a whole discussion way back when I was in grad school in the late 80s and 90s. And there was this a mathematician named Marvin Minsky. He was like a pioneer in this whole area. And I still remember him making this declaration. I don't remember exactly the date, but he said that there hasn't been any major development in artificial intelligence in the last 5-6 years, something along that line. And now, poor Minsky is not here to see what's going on right now. But that particular discussion was a part of that my studies in linguistics.
So you mentioned language. You also mentioned language. And I know that within AI, there's an area or a topic of large language models. Why don't you explain to us what that is?
Yeah, so I think there's a simple way to think about it. even though it's very complex. But simply speaking, a large language model is a computer algorithm that inputs some text or words and outputs words also. Think of it as like a vending machine, right? You walk up to the vending machine, you put in some money, and you get out M&Ms or something. A language model is like a vending machine, but instead of putting in money, you put in some words. Like, I went to the park too. And then something happens, and then something comes out. But instead of M&Ms now, it's more words, the completion of that sentence, to walk my dog or something like that. At its very fundamental level, that's what a large language model, and more generally, things like neural networks, really the backbone of machine learning and artificial intelligence. They are like little vending machines. The mathematical word for this is a function. So they're functions. And a function is just something where you give it some input to get started. It manipulates that input according to some rules, and then you get an output. Back in, middle school or high school, those inputs and outputs are numbers. That's when, students are working with mathematical functions. But the amazing thing, I think, is like, why stop at numbers? We have letters in language and in linguistics too. And so the thing that gets complicated, though, and what distinguishes this from, what students do in middle school with numbers, is that the rules for manipulating what you feed into this are very, very complicated. And they start to have names like transformer. That's the, T part of ChatGPT, which is on a lot of people's minds these days. So the functions are very complicated and really sophisticated and amazing what they can do. But at its fundamental level, it's just kind of like a vending machine. You put in some words and you get out some words.
And when what are the parameters that guide the output of those words? So
that's a great question. I mean, this is like an active area of research. Mathematicians and researchers like what's actually going on under the hood. So there are some parameters, but these are, I don't know if you meant in the technical math sense. I mean, it really gets technical there.
I did not mean it in the technical sense, although I realize that there is a technical term.
That's a word that we use that means something very specific. And part of the question is, what are these actual parameters in the algorithm doing? Like, they're so successful, but when you look under the hood, it's a little bit messy. And by little bit, I mean a lot messy. And an active area of research actually is interpreting what these models are doing and why they are so successful in kind of looking under the hood.
Joe, back to the language issue. That's something that you've studied for many years with the academic discipline of studying language and rhetoric. As we move into this kind of AI field, how does your discipline interact with that kind of output of language?
It is very disturbing. May be too strong a word to talk about that, but the language can be used in so many different ways. But language is spoken by humans for the purpose of human interaction. Many people use the word communication, but nobody knows what communication really is. But interaction means that there is some sort of a physical connection that is taking place. Even as I'm speaking, I'm vibrating your eardrums, and that's registering into your gray matter, and that you're taking it in a certain way, and it's causing some sort of a physiological reaction even as I speak. If I can make you nervous, or if I can make you laugh, relax, so forth and so on. And that so the language has an effect in the concrete actual reality. And that artificial intelligence, and of course, it produces a language, but what kind of a concrete physical reaction that it is producing, and that what are the implications of all these, that becomes a very crucial issue for all of us to be able to think through and then discuss.
Has, in the field of artificial intelligence, has there been any thinking around that topic of humans interacting with a computer, but what's coming back is not human interaction. It's sort of computer-human interaction. And because the language that's coming back is words that I recognize, it makes me feel as though I'm interacting with a person, though I'm not. And that's why I was asking the question about the parameters around it, because it's the inputs, right? So, for example, if one of the limitations of ChatGPT was that it only had access to a certain portion of the internet, and then that started to expand. But if you limit the data input, then you're going to limit obviously the output.
Yeah.
The decisions around who decides what goes in that's an interesting topic as well.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, yeah, there are many limitations to this, which those limitations do remind you that, oh yeah, this isn't a person that I'm talking to. And I think we've all, played around with large language models where they sort of hallucinate or definitely give you an answer that's clearly wrong. So there's definitely limitations to that, which I think is helpful because it sort of prevents you from getting too lured in a way that could be dangerous.
Yeah. Joe, maybe we'll shift the topic a little bit to literature.
Okay.
Why are people fascinated with technology and the advancement of technology to get closer to the appearance of human interaction?
It is a really interesting topic because humans and machines have had a long history of a mutually suspicious relationship. I said mutually. It's not really mutual. It's one-sided. Machines don't care. But the thing is, we've used machines, technology, ever since the dawn of the humanity. There's two things going on. Number one, we love using technology. Basically, that technology is there. I have a book right here by Jacques Ellul, a French theologian and a philosopher, wrote this technological society back in the 50s. English translation is like in the early 63, but when you read it, his discussion is so contemporary. But he traces the history from the Greeks to the Romans and that radical shift that took place in the 19th century after the Industrial Revolution. And before that, there was this very, very slow development in technology. For example, Ellul talks about that issue of plowing, and took them us a long time just using one stick to that team of horses to plow the field. And it was not that big a deal for us to have this massive amount of ground to till. We lived very simply. But things changed after the 19th century. The reverse side is that when you get into that kind of a situation and that everything becomes more efficient, more technologized, more machines become a part of our life, then we became very suspicious of it. And we want to bring in ethics, aesthetics, which, there's absolutely no reason for a sewing machine to have cast iron flowers in it. But they put it there so that the machine itself can be more beautiful. They have hammers, ornate hammers. What are we going to do with the ornate hammers? We nail the nails. But we have to bring in the human value into it to embellish it because of this suspicion that we have about our relationship with the machines.
Tai-Danae, can talk a little bit about what some of the limitations of artificial intelligence are.
Yeah, so I think a big one is when we say artificial intelligence, because of flurry in the past couple of years, one of the first things that pops into people's minds are large language models and things like ChatGPT, and that's because they're easily accessible to us. You can just use it and it's free and no big deal. But there's a lot more to artificial intelligence than just language. And in fact, those other applications may have different limitations or different drawbacks or different advantages than large language models. So that's one thing to say. When we're speaking about language models, though, in particular, those limitations, I think the point that you made about data is an excellent one, because these models, these functions are vending machines. They are trained, which just means they have received a lot of inputs in the past. So they're like, yeah, I'm used to this. Okay, feed me words, I output words, great. And then they learn which words go together in the English language or whatever language because they see lots of examples. Okay, but where do these examples come from? Well, Wikipedia, whatever's on the internet, corpora of text, so things that people have done. Now, when you think about that, number one, it's not a continuous uploading of data. Like ChatGPT does not have access to the conversation in this room at this moment. It may in a few years.
Wow.
Okay, when the transcript is on YouTube and then OpenAI can scrape the chat, but it doesn't have access to it right now. That's an example of a limitation. When you're teaching in class and you're giving a lecture, the language model does not have access to what you are speaking in the classroom at that moment. Another limitation, though, where is it getting all of this information? Where is it seeing examples of written language? Well, we just mentioned it, the internet. Does the internet have a biblical worldview? Largely speaking, no. Right? So that's going to come out in ChatGPT. And, researchers know things like this. They know that there's bias because these language models depend on the data, and the data has bias in it because the data comes from people. So there are humans that kind of tweak things and adjust things so that the model's output is better. But then even those humans also have biases, and they may also not have a biblical worldview. So these are just some things to think about. And that's just thinking about one sector of artificial intelligence dealing with language, but there's much, much more, many more examples.
Yeah, I know that we've heard and read reports about China with their television cameras or webcams covering nearly all of their cities, and of course, no human is looking at all of that data, but they have AI algorithms that are scanning those things. Maybe two questions: one, what light can you shed on that phenomena, and then number two, what is the human preoccupation with knowing what everyone is doing all the time?
So I can make the first answer quick. I'm not sure what to say other than be careful and be smart. But maybe Joe has a response to the other question.
Yeah, it's that imitation about God's omnipresence. There's not much question about that. I mean, God's so-called incommunicable attributes, such as all the omni words, omnipresence, omnipotence, omniscience, all these things are trying to be duplicated with the use of machines. So we want to be at two places at the same time. We can't, so we use the technology to simulate it.
So we've talked a lot about the background of what is AI and how has it fit, how has it become a part of our culture, and in different ways we can think about that. I wonder what either of you might say from your particular academic areas about how Christians should be interacting with or thinking about artificial intelligence. Is it something to fear? Is it something to avoid? What threats might we face from it? What benefits might we draw from it?
So I have a couple of thoughts on that. Maybe towards the benefits part first. So we were mentioning how there are other examples of artificial intelligence beyond just language applications. Some artificial intelligence these days really depends on large amounts of data for it to be successful. We were talking about feeding this vending machine lots of examples of text. But you can imagine scenarios where you don't have a lot of data or information available, and yet you still want to solve a task. I'll give you an example. You can imagine someone is ill with a disease or sickness for which no drug yet exists. Now, you may not have a lot of data in terms of people with this illness trying these different drugs. And in fact, you probably hope that you don't want many people to be ill with this. And you certainly don't want to just try, like, hey, Mitch, do you want to just tell me how this goes and try it?
Trial and error.
Trial and error. This is not good. So what do you do in that case? Well, one option is that you can use computers to simulate how proteins and molecules in your body would interact with the molecules in a potential drug. How do you do that, though? Well, in addition to having some, knowledge about software engineering, you also need knowledge of the world and nature and how the laws of physics operate at the molecular level. These are laws of nature that God put in place on day one. In His grace, man has been able to probe those laws and give names to them. And this is where things like, quantum physics, for example, comes into play. So you can take knowledge from physics in one domain, and you can take knowledge from artificial intelligence and machine learning, and you can combine those areas to simulate how a potential drug would work on a person that has this disease. And that's great because you're saving, people from adverse effects, and potentially you're saving lots of money as well. And this is an application where you're combining artificial intelligence, machine learning with domain knowledge from something else in the sciences to benefit people. This is an example of artificial intelligence. It's maybe not one that we often think about because it's new and it doesn't have a nice interface like ChatGPT. When I see examples of like that, to your original question, I think, wow, it is so amazing that God made his universe intelligible and able to be discovered and able to be harnessed and subdued so that people can live on Earth. Now, the interesting thing is, when scientists are discovering these things, are they always giving the honor back to the Lord? No, of course not. Of course not. But even in his grace, he still lets all of us to be able to discover these things. So when I think of good applications of artificial intelligence, or ones that may seem noble on the surface, I really see God's kindness and his grace, that he would just not only allow us to breathe his air, but to continually be able to discover the laws that he has put in place. It's amazing to me that a language like mathematics should fit so perfectly to describe these laws in nature. I mean, why is that? It's because he ordained it that way. So that's one way that I see artificial intelligence. It's just really, we're at his mercy. He is enabling us to make use of his creation, really, so that no one is with excuse at the end. On the negative side, though, of course, believers really have to exercise discernment, being aware of certain limitations. Back to language models, for example, we can't just go into these things willy-nilly. Like you're saying, it's good to be aware, that you may be watched or listened to. So it's, I think, really wise to be aware of what's going on, and then to exercise discernment. And that kind of wisdom, of course, only comes from Scripture.
Yeah, I can answer it in a little bit more of a generalized kind of way. Yeah, artificial intelligence, as with every other technology, is just a tool. So tools can be used in the positive way or a negative way. I can use the hammer to build a house, or I can use it to hit people with. So it depends upon how it's going to be used. And you can use that technology to glorify God or use it against him. So you can just see that the origin of technology all the way back in Genesis chapter 4. It came out of a line of Cain. That the first metallurgist, Tubal Cain, first musician, Jubal, first poet, Lamech, who wrote the very first poetry, was a horrible poetry that glorifies his bigamy addressed to his two wives, and that parts are referred to as the Song of a Sword, and that's the one manifestation of it. But when the building of the tabernacle, temple, all these things are being used to glorify God. Metallurgy, that building of that, using that bronze and iron, all kinds of things to build things, and also, that the music used in the worship, poetry, all these things can be used to glorify God. So we as Christians, I think that tools are given, and that we need to know the tools well and know how to use it. Then we can use it for the glory of God, for the furtherance of the gospel, rather than using it against God for selfish means.
This podcast comes from a university, and one of the immediate reactions that people think of with artificial intelligence, specifically something like ChatGPT, is that students are finding new ways to cheat. And cheating's not new. There's a cleverness that isn't glorifying to God, and people are going to find all sorts of ways to do that. And that's a concern that I get from a lot of people. What does this mean for the future of education? And I think back to, the early 2000s as the internet started to become more, publicly accessed. And it was the same kind of question. If it brought into question, what is education for? Is it for the dissemination and the transfer of knowledge? Partly. But if that information is now freely accessible and available, what is the purpose of an educational institution? And I think, for us, thinking through just what you were talking about, Joe, helping students to understand there are beneficial and ethical ways to use technology. There are unethical ways to do it, but it's not just a choice between using it unethically or ethically. It's also helping to develop in them a mindset of, why am I here? I've talked before about, and many other people have as well, I didn't invent the phrase of the commodification of education, that education has become, for many, an experience of collecting enough commodity chips or coins,
Yes.
which they then trade those in for a degree and move on with their life. One of the things that we try and encourage our students to do is to think about their experience at the Master's University as an opportunity to expand and fill out and develop areas of a mind that God has created and given to them. Not everybody does that or has that opportunity. And if they view their education as amass information long enough to put it back onto an exam, then they've missed the point of education. As you think about that philosophically, the purpose of education, Joe, how would you counsel people who are thinking through maybe hiring students who went through school, have a degree, wondering, did ChatGPT write all their exams? How would you assess learning in students, particularly as they're entering the workforce?
I think what you were describing about this, what's happening in the educational industry, is such an excellent way of understanding this tool-human relationship, and especially in this an institution like ours. I mean, educational institution's purpose is not primarily in learning how to use the tools, but it's more in terms of self-development. So if you're just totally focused upon the outcome, that the sports is a great illustration. I mean, if you do steroids, do performance-enhancing drugs, then you can, of course, perform well. But when you do that, you're not developing yourself as a person. And the purpose of education is a self-development. It's totally different from industrial application of it.
Career education.
Mm-hmm. So before 19th century, when the development of technology was a lot slower, people did not refine their tools. Tools been there for a long time. They refine their skills. But that, to me, is the purpose of education. It's to refine ourselves, self-development, increasing our knowledge, increasing our ability for discernment, as Tai-Danae talked about. When you go to the workforce, you are basically not showing, okay, here's my computer, this is what I can do, but here I am. This is who I am. And I have my value system, I have my work ethics, I have my ability to learn and perform certain tasks, but primarily this is what I got from this institution. It's a character development.
As you think about students learning discernment and learning wisdom, going back to this idea that artificial intelligence can solve problems, but only to the extent that the people who are inputting the data and setting I won't call them parameters so that I'm not getting technical, but setting the fences, setting the context for the problem to be solved, to the extent that those people understand the problem themselves, then they can ask the artificial intelligence to solve the problem. But I guess one of the questions that I've heard people talk about is, can it genuinely solve problems and think critically?
Well, can it solve problems? Certainly it can solve problems. Here's an example. Have you ever deposited a check at the ATM? Someone writes you a check. I think people still use checks.
Some.
Okay.
Yeah.
Back in the day when we were writing checks,
Stone Age.
Stone Age, you can deposit a handwritten check in an ATM. And if I write you a check for $100 with my handwriting,
Oh, yes, please.
right on the ATM, it'll say $100. Does this look right? And you can tap yes or no. So it's read my handwriting.
Hmm.
So the ATM, the computer, can read handwritten digits, and that's a task. So someone, like, this is a thing that people have worked on for quite a while in the past, recognizing handwritten digits, image recognition. So from that perspective, just thinking of your question in basic terms, like, can AI perform tasks? Absolutely. It's doing that all the time. I mean, every time someone uses ChatGPT and they get what they wanted out of it, hopefully it's not, to cheat in a student setting, but maybe there's a use for it. That's fine. It works in that sense. But yeah, to your point, I think some people are wondering, oh, is this really thinking?
Mm-hmm.
Is it, is there some sentience or something behind it? I think from my perspective, the answer is very clearly no. I know that not everyone would agree with that. And of course, it's not hard to find examples online, even just doing a quick search of folks that have an opposite perspective. But I will say, just as a mathematician who kind of works on the behind-the-scenes questions around this and understanding things from a mathematical perspective and understanding some of the software engineering, to me, I think that equips me to not feel scared about it because I can kind of see it for what it is. And so does it do tasks? Yes, absolutely. It's wonderful, like some of the examples I mentioned earlier. Even like when your credit card company sends you a message and is like, oh, we think we detected fraudulent activity. That's artificial intelligence too. Does that work? Yes, especially if, someone stole your credit card. So it works. Is this like a living being thing? No, absolutely not.
So what do you think about using the brute computer force to solve that theorems?
Oh, are you referring to examples of artificial intelligence and machine learning that can solve some math problems?
Yes.
Yeah, so there are examples of that have come out recently. I think it's okay. I personally, as someone who is discovering new ideas in mathematics, and what that really means is you're discovering what God has already put in place in nature.
Okay.
I'm not sure why someone would want to offload that to a computer. I think that when you are discovering in research and science in particular, the believer has an incredible opportunity to pray through their research, to depend on Christ in their investigations, to rely on Him and His guidance. That's a really precious part, from my perspective, of being a researcher. Why would I want a computer to just do? Now, on the other hand, maybe there are some really tedious computations. I mean, there's no thought going on. It's just plug and chug, but man, that's going to take me hours. I already know that once this is done, I can get going. Something like that, I could see that as an advantage. Like if there's a computer program that can just kind of check all of these things, which I know are kind of, mindless computations or something like that, I think that would be convenient. But generally speaking, I think even in difficult, arduous times, there's just something so sweet and precious about relying on Christ and going through that difficulty. And that even happens in mathematics.
I did not know that the mathematicians prayed.
Well, I'm not sure that they all do, but for the believer, that's a great opportunity that we have.
I think that as AI gets better at solving tasks, completing tasks, there's concern culturally of people losing jobs. Jobs are going to go away. Joe, maybe you've thought a little bit about how have humans adapted when technology, you mentioned earlier a lot of examples, even historically, ancient history of technology and human interaction. How have they adapted to that? I mean, when the plow became more efficient, People didn't just, roll over and die.
Yeah.
They adapted.
Yeah, my wife likes to. She after COVID, she started doing the gardening, and that she has tremendous pleasure out of digging the earth and planting things and watching it grow, and that there's this relationship we can have about our own work and that finding pleasure and doing such menial things. And what happens is when technology comes in, then the whole focus becomes product at the end, what happens at the end, and process gets totally neglected. So if it's so tedious, like your computational stuff, perfectly understandable. But Tai-Danae, what you're talking about, praying through, some of the projects you do, that's also a process as well. And you can find a pleasure in doing that. Okay, so, what's so interesting about our relationship with, say, technology, AI included, is, as I said before, that we are very suspicious of it. Why are we suspicious? Because of this fear of losing our freedom. And even that almost all science fiction depiction of AI or machines versus human, it's been negative. We're fearful they're going to take over. The positive ones are the ones that machines learn to be like humans. Like in the case of Terminator, they learn to value human life, even they self-sacrifice, and then we're like, okay, that's okay. So rather than humans becoming like machine is fearful, machines becoming like human is great. This loss of the freedom that we're afraid of, it's really interesting because freedom involves unreliableness. We are so what's the right word? That unreliable, not certain, precarious, all these the so-called human elements that's involved in there. And that particular finiteness itself is the fun part, and it's a beautiful part. That William Blake talked about fearful symmetry and Tiger. Nothing in nature is symmetrical. God created everything. God created is unique on its own. So that particular aspect is the one that we as humans tend to value, because that reflects the kind of a God that we serve, the kind of God that created us in the way He did.
What do you see as some of the horizon item issues with AI? What's next?
That is a great question.
We should ask AI.
We should ask AI. Yeah, can we get a laptop? That's a little bit hard to say because the timeline in AI moves very rapidly. So even to speculate, like what could our discussion be like 10 years from now? 10 years is like an eternity in the tech space. So I don't know if I want to go on record making claims, because I'll definitely be wrong. But one thing I do think about, just kind of in the context of this larger talk, is that generally speaking, the coming generation, and I even think of, small children now that are growing up with all of this tech, and how important it is for the Christians to be firmly grounded in Scripture. I mean, now, yes, but 10 years from now, 20 years from now, it's going to be so imperative for the young people that are coming up to be really firm in the truth of God's word and unwavering, because the culture is not getting better. And with the advent of all of this AI, it's just like providing more opportunities for sin, which means that Christians are going to be standing out more and more and more as long as they don't compromise, which can be more challenging because all of this technology is becoming so consuming. But I think that that's a fantastic opportunity and encouragement for us to rely on Christ, to make sure that we are in His Word every day, to make sure that our discernment is informed by Scripture, because I think that the coming days are going to be pretty interesting.
Makes me think of some of the recent developments in AI chatbots that are becoming companion-like for people. Joe, you might be equipped to kind of address this. Why would people choose to interact with a person like artificial intelligence chatbot to keep them company? I mean, the obvious answer is because they're crazy. But people do this, and it's become an attractive thing for people. Even some healthcare companies are using them for what they term to be mental health in people. How should Christians think about even that kind of interaction?
Okay, I have to think off the top of my head, ask a few questions to myself and to you guys as well. Why do we look at mirrors? Why do we have dolls? And it's almost like an extension of ourselves, and not in that some a way of extending our abilities or anything like that, but object in the mirror becomes who we are. We look at it, we project ourselves into it. We don't like, we try to ignore it. Or, maybe it could be the opposite. Everything we look at in the mirror we don't like, so we try to change it. It's a form of a narcissism. And our society is increasingly becoming narcissistic. We talked about self-development implicit in education, and including learning how to use tool and developing ourselves to increase our skills and all that. But that's stopping, and we're trying to conform everything. We try to remain static, and whatever's outside becomes just extension of who we are. We stop growing, and we get into this vicious cycle of a self-perpetuating homeostasis without growth. And those people who create their online girlfriends, they don't grow. When you're in a relationship, marriage, I've been married to that same woman for 37 years. It's a hard thing because I have to change, I have to grow, and she'll tell me all the areas that I need to grow. And I can only figure that out when I have this physical, tangible interaction with the person that's not me. But what you're talking about is just the same.
And I think that then highlights for me some of the limitations of AI. AI is particularly good at amassing data. The access to data is far more than any one person could have. But then the skill and the ability to tactfully apply that information to a person. So we talked earlier about solving the problems with the interaction of proteins and genes and these kind of things. That those are fairly predictable things. People are unpredictable, as you said, Joe, and it takes a skill to apply those things into those. It's not just communicating information. Like you mentioned, the marriage relationship. If it were simply just the communication of information back and forth, then we wouldn't have a lot of problems in our marriages. It's the specific application and the way it's applied that helps to mutually grow back and forth. And I think that's where we would look at artificial intelligence and say that's not capable of that mutually beneficial growing back and forth relationship. Are there any final thoughts that you might have for us, things that we weren't able to cover?
The issue of knowledge and the act of knowing, which is we talk about artificial intelligence, the intelligence part. Biblically speaking, it involves two aspects. One is putting things together. There's a Greek word for understanding. Suniemi is the Greek word that literally means putting it together. So integrating all those things into the coherent thoughts. And the other one is really interesting. The word is diakrino, which is often translated as discernment. Book of Proverbs in Hebrew uses the word vina, which means to separate, cut apart. And that so that the knowledge involves those two aspects, putting it together and taking it apart. What is similar, what's different? And the very first place where we see the particular activity is in Genesis chapter 2. And verses 19 and 20, where God commands Adam to name animals. Naming involves exactly those two parts. Identification, like my last name, Suzuki, identifies me with this Suzuki family. So differentiation, identification, that's what Adam was tasked by God to do. But to me, most fascinating thing about that is God did not restrict it. God gave Adam freedom. Whatever he named became the name of those animals and birds or that winged creatures. So, that God has given us freedom, total liberty to develop knowledge, to name things, put them together. And that was a part of that his plan of exercising authority over this nature. So that part is the part that we cannot dismiss when it comes to our task of developing our own intelligence and educating people to be intelligent. When we leave those tasks in the hands of the machines, then the threat is that we tend to lose this liberty and become more algorithmic and mechanical, uniform.
Anything else come to mind for either of you?
So when we're speaking about education and really thinking about in the classroom, I mean, now there's this tool that students have to really cheapen their educational experience. And I think you mentioned something about helping them to have the right mindset to think about this properly. One thing that came to mind when you mentioned this is this word excellence. Especially at TMU, where we have the freedom to talk about Scripture and truths of Scripture in the classroom. I just keep thinking about excellence and how our Lord is so excellent. He is excellent in all that he does. And as we strive towards Christ-likeness, this was something on my mind a lot when I was in college. Really, really difficult. And you're tempted to take these shortcuts. And this was before AI was, as popular as it is now. And just trying to recognize that God is the one that put me in the classroom. This is the job that he has given me. I'm not in the workforce yet. I'm just the student. This is the job that God has given me to do, and I want to honor him. I want to strive for excellence because he has given me no less. So when you think about, okay, now I have this ChatGPT, I have a paper due, I know that ChatGPT can knock this out in 30 seconds. Why should I put all the work in? Well, as a Christian, we our heart is not to dishonor Christ. We want to honor him in all that we do and strive for excellence in that. And so I just think that that's such an amazing part of being at the Master's University. You can't really have those conversations in the classroom in other universities where the students will get that. Like they'll say, yes, you're right. Or at least they'll have something to think about. So just when we're thinking about artificial intelligence and education, I think from a student's perspective, this is the job that God has given you to do. He provided you to be at the Master's University. He orchestrated all of these events from all of these people in your life and provided the finances and the rooming, even up to choosing who your roommate is, who your professors are, what year you are, where that is in the grand scheme of things. He put you here at this time because that's where he wants you. That's the job that he has given you to do. And if he's called you to do well in the classroom for him, you can trust the results to him and know that he knows how best to glorify himself with your best. But if you're not giving him your best because you'd rather be at a friend's house instead of studying for your exam that's on Monday, and now you want to pray on Monday, oh Lord, please help me to pass this, knowing that you didn't give him your all. So I think that's just such a blessing that we have here at TMU, is that we have the freedom to talk about these things, and we have students whose hearts are to honor Christ. They want to honor the Lord, and they recognize these truths. And I just think it's what a blessing that we get to talk about this in the context of AI. I mean, this is pretty rare, I think.
I think I'll begin to emphasize in my classrooms that the importance of a process more, to let my students know what you're doing right now. How does it make you a better servant for Christ?
Yes. Yes.
That's going to, including my own instruction, what I do right now, how is it helping you become a better servant for Christ? And when we focus our attention on the process and not product, then we begin to see how God deals with us as individually. Yeah.
I think for me, we often say that Christians shouldn't fear anything because we know who is in sovereign control of all things. Fear is not the right word. Discernment is the right word, and it fits with our podcast. So I thank you guys for spending some time today sharing. And I know that there's underneath each of what you both talked about, there's quite a depth of information and thought to go into that. But hopefully for our viewers, they were able to spur some of their thinking and point them ultimately back to the Creator, understanding that nothing takes God by surprise. AI didn't take God by surprise at all. And in His sovereign control, as believers, we can rest in that.
Thanks for joining us for The Art of Discernment, a podcast of the Masters University. You can learn more about the university at masters.edu. Be sure to subscribe to The Art of Discernment wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you're watching us on YouTube, subscribe to our channel. If you know someone who would benefit from today's show, we encourage you to share it with them. We'll see you next time.